There is never a dull moment with our show opening guest. Former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney joins us from Toronto to talk NATO, trade deals, terrorism, pensions, and of course, Donald Trump. Brian Mulroney joins me from Toronto. Mr. Mulroney, you're the guest of honor at a NATO alliance anniversary tonight. Is NATO, in your view, re-energized or irrelevant or somewhere in between?
Well, it's relevant, but it's not re-energized, but it better be pretty soon. Because, the Americans are carrying a massive part of the NATO load, which means that most other countries, including Canada, are not carrying their share of the burden. And with people like Donald Trump saying that NATO is obsolete, that summit that is going to take place in Warsaw for NATO, the heads of government summit, better re-energize it because it's vitally needed today, all the more so because apart from the conventional threats to security in Europe, we have the added threats, of course, that are coming from terrorism.
Right, and obviously NATO has requested Canada consider bolstering its soldiers. It sees Russian belligerents ramping up. Do you think that's a reasonable request and that we should do it then?
Well, I think two things. I think that Canada should begin a thoughtful process of increasing its contribution from 1% of GDP to 2%, which it has undertaken to do again in 2006 officially. And I think that we should begin the commitment of more troops to NATO and, of course, to the United Nations security forces, peacekeeping security forces that are sent around the world.
Right, and you had me at Trump there. I twigged my interest. I have to ask you, President Donald Trump, you've been friends with Republican presidents in the past. What do you think a Republican president like Trump would look like if he gets the keys to the nuclear launch codes?
Well, we don't know. I've been friendly with Democratic and Republican presidents, and on foreign policy, they all tended to hew to the same line. There was a good deal of moderation in their actual approaches, with some exceptions, of course, in Iraq. But by and large, over the last, I suppose, 50 years, there's been a sense of maturity and moderation in the American approach from all presidents. Anybody who disrupted that would do so at his peril, and so Mr. Trump is going to have to be very careful when he talks about national security in some of the bellicose terms that he's used to date.
Yeah, but you certainly did a lot of outreach around the world when you were Prime Minister. Donald Trump seems to be putting up walls, not only to trade, which is something you tried to knock down, but certainly to religious minorities and around the world, like the Muslims. He's talking about racial profiling. Are you worried about what you're seeing happening down there, or do you think he will moderate in time to take control?
Well, I think he will if his day comes to pass, because great countries like Canada and the United States are essentially built on immigration. More immigrants, not less. That's what we're lacking. Immigrants bring dynamism, they bring appreciation, they bring gratitude, they bring enthusiasm, and they bring the genius of a man with his family looking for freedom and advancement. This is what great countries need. This is what kept Canada in the prosperity business for so long, and the United States. There are already 3 million Muslims in the United States. To suggest that you should start to keep Muslims out at the border is completely inconsistent with the 200-year history of the United States of America. So I think my own view is that what made Canada prosper is in large measure our immigration policies, and the same thing applies to the United States. And you tinker with that or fool around with that at your peril.
And I can't help but ask you about free trade. You got us going down this path with the states and then to Mexico. Donald Trump says it's a historically bad agreement and terribly disadvantageous to America. What do you say to this growing sense of protectionism that seems to certainly be within the Republican ranks?
Well, in Canada, since free trade, we've created 4.9 million new jobs. We've doubled our GDP to $1.8 trillion in 25 years. It took 125 years to get the first $900 billion. It took us 25 under free trade to get to the next. The same thing applies in the United States. They have an unemployment record at 5%, which is lower than ours. They've created millions of new jobs since NAFTA, tens of millions of new jobs. And so anybody who tells you that trade is a downer for their economy really doesn't understand the implications of international economies and the extent to which we are commingled and we depend on each other's prosperity to raise our own.
So Donald Trump's practicing the politics of ignorance.
Well, I think that if you talk to anybody who's been in government in a serious way in the last 50 years, they'll tell you that the absolute, all you got to do is look at the 1930s. You want to shut down the American economy, just put up trade barriers of 30 or 35% against China and Mexico and Canada and so on, and you'll be in a recession and a depression very, very quickly. So I don't think that's ever going to happen again. I think that the Americans lived through that experience and they don't need it again.
You've cautioned, and I want to switch to terrorism because time's running short.
We're not going to do it in Canada, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's true. You've cautioned against overreacting. I think I've seen quotes from you. Don't get overreacting to terrorism. You can stir up the bad guys and help them. What's your view of Canada's responses recently? Is Canada doing enough or too much or somewhere in between?
Well, I think we have to contribute more internationally through NATO and through the United Nations and other instances. But I think by and large, Canada has done quite a creditable job in the fight against terrorism. The whole question of sharing intelligence and the manner in which it's gathered and conveyed is very important in this battle, and Canada is much admired for its role in that area of our international endeavor. So I would say that Canada is doing very well in much the same way as I point out that, for example, this decline in defense spending to less than 1% of GDP is not the fault of the present government. They've only been there 8 months. This has been going on for 20 years. And that's the area that we have to correct first and foremost. Because I think we're doing pretty well in the intelligence sharing and the intelligence gathering part of the equation.
I know this is an issue that you tried at one point in time to sort of look at changing social programs for seniors, and it didn't work out too well, and the name Charlie Brown comes to mind. Is the enhancement of the CPP necessary in your view? Do you think it's a good move that the Trudeau government's doing now?
I haven't studied it carefully enough, Don, but there's no question but that the ultimate objective of providing our seniors with a better retirement is in order. It's pretty tough for many people across Canada, having given our country an entire life of good work, find themselves in difficulty in what should be their golden years. So while I'm not ready to pronounce on any given formula, I am very enthusiastic about the idea of opening our minds to different possibilities as to the manner in which we can enhance the individual economic security of Canadians, elder Canadians.
I know last time we chatted, Mr. Mulroney, you made a comment that Justin Trudeau should not be underestimated. He's been Prime Minister now for just around 240 days or so. Any early reviews come to mind? How's he doing so far?
Well, just the fact that he was underestimated it makes the fact that he's Prime Minister pretty outstanding. Look, I think he's doing well. This is not an easy job, and the fact that the fact that he obviously never held it before and is doing as well as he is a great compliment to him. I think as well that Rona Ambrose is doing a terrific job as interim leader of the opposition, and I think that both of them together are conveying a new sense of purpose and a new style of civility and effectiveness in the governance of Canada to the Canadian people, and I think that's good for both of them and it's good for us.
Brian Mulroney, it's always a pleasure chatting with you, sir. Thanks for coming on Power Play.
Thank you, Don.